field. Karim Mezran is the director of the Center for American Studies at Rome, and he's currently at Johns Hopkins doing teaching and research. He is a senior fellow at the Middle East Policy Council in Washington, D.C., and he obtained his master's degree in Arab Studies at Georgetown University and PhD in International Affairs at Johns Hopkins. Karim is the author of Negotiation and Construction of National Identities. He also co-authored L'Africa Mediterranea Storia e Futuro, forgive my Italian, but and the author of and the author of a number of articles and books. Karim will speak for 35 minutes, and then we'll open the floor to your questions and comments. Because this is a live webcast, could I ask you all to close your cell phones, because I'm told it interferes with the live webcast. So, Karim.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sfandiari. It's always a pleasure to come here at the Woodrow Wilson, and thanks for giving me the opportunity to come and speak. And mostly thanks to all of you for being here in such a hot day. I myself probably would have remained home or in my office. So this is worth two points. What I intend to do is to talk about Libya, what is going on and what is going on, and try to see and maybe later on sketch with you the possible outcomes of the crisis as it is unfolding. I gave this title, which has immediately been criticized by my fellow countrymen, The Death of an Idea, not because I think or I preach that Libya should be divided or something, or that it's, the whole idea of Libya is dead or finished. It is that I fear that that is what is going to happen. So it's the worst possible outcome that can come, is that the division at the end of Libya, but it's probably also, it is probably the most possible or probable outcome, and we will see together how I think this. We talked about civil war. Incidentally, Hala, it's a term that I've been using and being criticized for using, because lots of people say this is not a civil war. This is a people against the mercenaries of a leader, and therefore that was supposed to be done quickly. And this analysis that saw this situation not as a civil war but as an insurgency against foreign militias has been denied by facts, and today we'll see that it is a civil war. So the term we have been used, it's much more appropriate today even than it has been in the last few months. Just for those of you who are not very familiar with Libya, it is for most scholars who deal with Libya, and my colleagues, we all talk to each other, so we all have exchanged this idea. It's a very humble experience, because by myself first, as I mentioned the first time I came to speak here, I was asked by the director of the editor of the most important Italian journal, Geopolitics, to write an article saying why I thought, or what would happen in Libya, comparing it with Tunisia and Egypt, and why it was difficult that something like that would happen in Libya. So I took my analysis, the data, the report, the fact that I've been in Libya many, many times in the last 10 years, and it's my country, so I thought I knew it very well, and we wrote an article where, through the analysis, we come up and said it can't happen. Why? And the three pillars upon which the regime rested: the rent state, right? I mean, the welfare state was perfectly in place. Most Libyans got their money from the states, were being financed, the subsidies. There was no sign of crisis in it. There was no sign of problems with the welfare state as it is. Actually, as soon as Tunisia happened, as soon as Egypt was in rioting, the regime came up and said, Since we understand the problem of unemployment, we are going to give 50,000 dinars to each newly graduated student to buy a house. We are going to give him a car for free, and we are going to forgive to the whole population electricity bill. They were coming up with all this new stuff. So that the distributive, the rentier, the welfare state was in place. The other pillar, which is the family, tribal, there were no signs of a crack in there. There were no signs of revolt. There has been riots in the south. There has always been some problems with Benghazi and some of the areas, but nothing that could lead to think of such a revolt of such a magnitude. And the leaders of the various tribes were coming and going from Tripoli. There had just been a big conference which everybody paid their homages to get that. There was no sign, but not said by me, but said by most Libyan scholars and abroad. The security apparatus. The security apparatus itself was there has been no defecture, no problems, no sign of cracks within the security apparatus. It is divided between the army, the police, the security forces, the security brigades. It was perfectly in shape. Obviously, that was, thank God I never delivered that article, otherwise I probably wouldn't be here. So I waited for a couple of days, and when things happened, I started saying maybe, something I didn't understand. And then I went on and tried to develop the analysis and understand what happened. But before that, what was going on in reality in the country were two very competing trends, in my opinion. On the one hand, especially in Cyrenaica, what we call the eastern provinces, there still was a malcontent, which was probably underestimated by us as well as by the regime. Islam and Islamism were widespread in Libya, especially the conservative part of Islam. And that too was probably underestimated as a form of protest, as a form of quiet withdrawal of large parts of society from participating in the state. And then the dysfunctionality of the government. It was a dictatorship, there is no doubt. And the repression was there, and that was there, and we all probably underestimated that. Why did we underestimate that? Because we were focusing, being trained, most of us in America, on the good aspect. For once, instead of being pessimistic, we were looking about optimism, and we were focusing on the fact that in the last 10 years, there had been a gradual opening in Libya. Newspapers were appearing, people were speaking a little bit more freely, especially in the Tripoli area. There were contact committees, groups that were talking around Saif al-Islam. There was a group of technocrats, lawyers, people who were preparing for a new constitution. There was a debate with them. People were calling abroad and asking for consultants to come and say, advise us on how to reform the state. All of this was probably never went into the facts. But the whole idea, the whole fact that in the former claustrophobic Libya until 2001, from 2001 onward, that was something we were talking about, was already a lot for us. Especially in Tripolitania, but I've seen in other parts of the country, has been a large improvement of the quality of life. New bars, restaurants, restructuring of houses, services. The Libyan supermarkets were full. You could find things in Libya that you couldn't find in Italy or in Egypt or in Tunisia. All of that led also to the impression of a country that was booming, a 20% increase in GDP. People feel free to. Everybody was opening a store, a restaurant, a bar, and that was the other impression we had. And second, the conclusion of the analysis was that probably it was set, and this is something that is still to be debatable, it was set on a certain course that would have brought probably to a gradual termination of the regime in a few years, and the taking over of other figures that were being raised at the time. Not a democracy, of course, but at least not Gaddafism and the craziness and that we have seen in the 70s, in the 80s, and to a certain degree in the 90s. All of that, obviously, is by now just a mere academic tale, because what happened is that then the revolt took place. And young people, when the population went to the streets in Benghazi. I'm not going to go through the whole story about it. There is an official narrative that says that there is a revolt and there is demonstrations, and then the soldiers, some soldiers defects, there are the massacres, the army in the hands of the insurgents, and then the withdrawal of the troop, and then whatever happens. There is another narrative who says that immediately, and that has been the one that has studied the International Crisis Group, came up with a very interesting research, who, by the way, supports with facts and witnesses what I came to say in February, in March when I came here. Something fishy happened at the beginning. The immediate peaceful revolt became an insurgency, an armed insurgency, right away from the second, third day. The attack to the barracks in Derna was not done by demonstrators, but by well-trained groups who took over and distributed the weapons. Vast part of the reports done by Al Jazeera and the narrative at the beginning were then proved to be false. And again, I said it, and I brought as a proof my own personal contacts where I was calling out, and is it true that this is happening? No. Now the International Crisis Group and other journalists, both Italian and French, come up with the report where they say exactly this. Said the attack to the hospital has never happened, the mass graves never happened, and so on and so on. So there was that other fishy aspect of raising the level of the tension internationally, which was immediately taken by the French President Sarkozy, who with incredible quickness and rapidity jumped on top of it and started taking these reports, and probably for his own personal reasons or political reasons, whatever that is, immediately declared that Gaddafi was a war criminal, and that should have been deferred to International Court, International Tribunal, Criminal Tribunal, and therefore obtaining two things. On the one hand, the switching of most European governments in their opinion about Gaddafi, making it from a recognized legal government representative of Libya to a rogue immediately. What bothered a lot of us was that the rapidity by which Sarkozy, after having received Gaddafi a couple of times in Paris, having allowed him to put his tent in the Champs-Élysées, having asked him and lobbied for selling him weapons and doing construction business, forgiving 40 years of criminal actions by this government, well proved. I'm not talking only about the assassinations of the Libyans, the repression that has happened in the country. I'm not even talking about that, just talking about the Pan Am bombing, the UTA bombing, and et cetera, et cetera. That would have been enough for, if you are not to talk to the man. Once it has been accepted and brought it in, then all of a sudden base yourself on 2 or 3 days of vastly fake reports, then suddenly he becomes a criminal. And therefore, the practical immediate effect was that it blocked any diplomatic action, especially by the country who had the largest interest in Libya, which was Italy, who was taken totally by surprise. The Minister of Foreign Affairs had no clue of what was happening, and therefore it's the only country that could have intervened rapidly to either block the situation or force a negotiation or try to reach an agreement or mitigate the violence of what was happening was blocked, because you don't talk to a guy that is a criminal all of a sudden and that is taken by the Criminal Court of Justice as a potential offender. Fish is also how the TNC in Benghazi gets formed all of a sudden. You have, out of this spontaneous revolt, out of this arming of youth and the everyday person who gets finally sees freedom and liberty at reach, takes the weapons and fight against the regime, all of a sudden you have the formation of a council of people that is formed mainly and mostly by ex-Gaddafi officers, ex-Gaddafi members of his government. And that is already something that for most of us has been like very strange, to put it mildly. But that's it. Fact is that despite the beginning of the few days, French and British support was immediately brought to the so-called TNC. But despite this little help, the revolt would have been crushed. the army was moving north, and it would have probably wiped out the whole TNC and the whole revolt had it not been for the NATO's intervention. First French and British, then American, and then when the Italians woke up one day and decided they could not allow Libya to be completely lost, and they decided to start yelling and screaming and made it and put it under the command of NATO. But it's still more or less the same kind of group. Then it became a humanitarian intervention, because without that, the massacres would have been much, much worse than the ones that the army was making on the march towards Benghazi. And that's now, you know the whole situation, and I'm not going to go through the various up and down, the battles, the taking of the city, the losing of the city. We have seen some surreal things. The bombing of Tripoli, well, it has been, I was calling and people on the news, you get the Tripoli was being bombed, and on the other hand, you had people who were shopping in the various markets, were fishing in the sea. So you have, I lived in many, and I told you when I came already in April, it's a surreal situation. It is a war that is very violent in certain areas, totally ignored in certain others. And the regime that was given for gone, that was given for completely defeated, started in reality showing that it had still troops and weapons to resist. What's the situation today on the ground? Well, despite NATO's intervention, it is not succeeding in getting rid of Gaddafi, which has always, as we claimed, been the main objective of NATO's intervention, especially of French intervention. The idea of protecting the civilians was the coverage for the idea for the Europeans to get rid of Gaddafi and to kill him. They're not doing that. They've been unlucky, they don't have enough intelligence, they don't know it, he is outsmarting them, whatever it is, they're not getting him. They weakened its forces, yes, but not decisively. The army is still fighting, it's still pretty much in good shape. The NTC, or the TNC, what you want to call it, has a leopard spot control of the territory, both in Cyrenaica and in Tripolitania. It is highly divided internally, and militarily there are signs of strengthening of the main core of the former military who are now with the TNC, but there is also they are realizing that militias are being formed at the sides, especially around Derna, around Beida. There are people who are coming up with 200, 300 armed men that they don't know who they are. By the way, I cannot quote it officially because it's just happening now, but there is a debate in the French parliament about Libya, and it seems, I have not seen it, but I've been told that the Prime Minister or the Minister of Defense have recognized the fact that a large cache of weapons that have been delivered to the TNC have ended in the hands of Islamist groups, and they are trying to recuperate that. And therefore, that is a sign of what? A sign of lack of control of the territory and of the situation. We have seen the reports of defectors from the Libyan army, high-level defectors who are telling the TNC people there is no way you can get rid of Gaddafi militarily as it is today. The regime is much stronger than you can think. And that opens up to the whole debate about the fact that it has been ignored, taken by the idea of the wishful thinking that I was talking before. The fact that the regime, and that is a mistake that has been done even with Saddam Hussein, the idea that an Arab dictator, because an Arab dictator runs a country in and of itself by himself. The fact that I personally do not know anybody that is in favor of Gaddafi does not mean that there isn't a certain consensus for him. A week ago, when I was trying to tell it that there is a consensus for Gaddafi, everybody was looking at me like you have hidden intent. There is. It is undoubtedly there is. And we have seen it on Sunday, the 30th was Sunday, when he brought, he said 300,000 people in the main square in Tripoli demonstrating for him. Friends of mine who are in Tripoli and Italian journalists who I contacted told me there were anywhere between 100 and 150,000. 50,000, let's be, when you in a state of siege bring 50,000, 100,000 people to support you, it's a show of strength. It's a show that there is some consensus. The whole idea that his army was made of all of militia, foreign militias or mercenaries, has been by now completely denied by the vast interviews we've done to officers of the army who are Libyans belonging to various tribes, to various realities. So it is a civil war. And Gaddafi, people forgot that he went already through an embargo. He knows how to hide. He knows how to, he has prepared for it, and he has enough money, and he's resisting because of the consensus, because of the army holding. He kept the access to the south, which is something that the Europeans also always forgot about it, because when they had the embargo up north, they were thinking that they could stop anybody to bringing weapons to Gaddafi, which has not happened because he has the free flow from the south. Journalists who are now going through the mountains of the Nefusa, where all the revolt, will tell you themselves, and are writing that even there, some villages, many villages, are still in favor of Gaddafi and are fighting against the others. So there is the possibility to pass up and down. The army that was in Fezzan is still there, loyal to him. It's not been touched yet. The air cover doesn't go south, so he can get from the south as many mercenaries, as much money and weapons he can get. This doesn't mean that time is all in his favor, but that he can resist. If he's not killed, he can resist at least another 6 months, if not a year, which leads us to a lot of problems in our diagnosis for a hypothetical outcome. I have designed a couple of scenarios. One is if Gaddafi gets killed, and here, in my opinion, there are two possibilities. The first one is a sudden implosion of the whole of the western area of Tripolitania, which is, this scenario has to be, in my opinion, is probably the worst, if not one of the worst. It means that since there are so many weapons around, so many other armed people, armed militias in Tripolitania, this will mean, I don't want to talk about an increase in civil war, but at least public disorders and rioting and looting and a situation of anarchy that will lead to the loss of the control of the territory for a long time, because there is nobody that can, in that case, have the military force to invade and control and police the situation. So a sudden implosion of the system is going to create probably the worst problem. So those who think that by killing Gaddafi everything will be done and will be resolved are in my opinion, wrong. If we are lucky, what can happen is that even Gaddafi killed, somebody around him, or either one of the generals or one of the security forces, if not one of his sons, because they don't have any credibility, would take power, would be capable of saying, Gaddafi's been killed, but I am holding control of the territory. I can guarantee the people with the guns. I can guarantee the army. I can guarantee the police. I can tell the TNC and I can tell the foreigners, listen, we can go on fighting, or let's sit down and discuss, because I'm not Gaddafi anymore. That is that would be a beautiful outcome. And just yesterday, the Council on Foreign Relations were talking about this, and my modest opinion was that in that case, there is a role for the Americans to play right immediately. If Gaddafi gets killed, right immediately, do recognize somebody of the regime, do give credit of somebody of the regime, try to strengthen somebody of the regime, the old regime, maybe somebody who's not that tainted with Gaddafi, to control and then pilot in a certain way this outcome. So this would allow at least for public order to be maintained, and would allow for a negotiation a la paix with the TNC people that would then probably produce under UN supervision, or still under NATO, or whatever international organization would be employed to do that, the possible outcome of an end of the civil war and a more civilized outcome for Libya. You tell me when I'm...
time.
Because I am running.
No.
But that presumes that Gaddafi gets killed, which I don't believe it will happen. Strike of luck can always occur, but he is far too smart. So what about if Gaddafi stays? Which is something that everybody is trying not to think about it, and because it's very easy to say save Libya once he's out. But if Gaddafi stays, if Gaddafi stays over the summer, and the Europeans, there are cracks in European adhesion. There is a debate in the French parliament which will end up not nicely. Sarkozy is under election threat. The Italian parliament is very divided, and one of the majority parties blackmailing the government to get out of the Libyan situation. The British have already exposed their problems. The Americans are probably not going. Therefore, the longer it lasts, the lesser will be most probably the NATO intervention. What will happen in that case? Well, in my opinion, there are two main scenarios that can happen. One horrendous and one very beautiful. The horrendous one is that France and England and the puppet, which is Italy in this case, behind them, will decide that, okay, we have invested so much in this action, we have put at risk our credibility, NATO itself is on the stake, so what do? Is that we can't get Tripolitania, well then let's concentrate on Cyrenaica, the eastern provinces versus the western provinces, whatever you want to call them. That is, and this is where the genesis I was talking about of the TNC and the genesis of the revolt comes to play, and it's important. It's the idea would be that of having the immediate recognition of the TNC as the official government of Libya. Attention to this, because that's, in my opinion, where the plan is. Recognize them as the official government of Libya by everybody. Send, therefore, defreeze the assets that Libya has it, allow, therefore, access to the Libyan safe to the people of the TNC, and strengthen that part of the country with investments, with weapons, with training the army, and developing that part, while at the same time maintaining the lip service that we are waiting for the freedom of the other part of the other half of Tripolitania, whenever that will happen. State of war will continue, but it will be de facto a defreezing of the situation and the division of the country. Tripolitania will be left in disarray, in a state of anarchy and civil war, and only Cyrenaica will be. This is de facto the partition of the country, which will allow the Europeans to cash on their initiatives and the Cyrenaica to profit about it. And in that case will be problematic for the other half of the country. This is, to me, is the worst possible scenario. Then there is the other alternative, which is what, and Michael is here, we were talking about this before. I tried to preach in April when I came, and I made a little bit of some interviews, and I tried to talk about the negotiation with Gaddafi. There was a wall against this point. The idea was that you don't negotiate with him, he's a criminal, and he's weak, and he's losing, and why should we negotiate with him? He's going, and let's wait 2-3 weeks of further bombing, we will get rid of it, and blah, 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 blah. Which left me, if you remember, with the idea of, nice, I've discovered that for most policymakers, it is easy to bomb and wage war than to engage into a very heavy diplomatic effort. Because of course it was difficult, but it was necessary at the point. Why? Because if you obtain a negotiation that guarantees the Gaddafi out, then you go back to the scenario number one I was painting before, where you can have control of the two areas, and then you can merge them and create a government and solve the situation. With difficulty, it's not going to be easy, but at least we would have avoided already a couple of months of war. In the last few days, I should say in a couple of weeks, I've seen pieces of that plan emerging. David Ignatius wrote about it, and Jeff Laurenti wrote about it, and other pieces have appeared in the press here, where God forbids, even the idea of Gaddafi staying in Libya, which was part of my original plan, started to penetrate into the public opinion, and at least into the think tank world and the academicians. And yesterday I've learned also Gene Kretz and this team at the State Department are talking about that. What would that mean in practice? The difficulty of a negotiation, which seems to be difficult, is by now already working. By the way, another thing that's happening now in the French Parliament is that the Prime Minister, it seems again, just said, we are negotiating with Gaddafi. And again, I've had information that somebody from Gaddafi is here talking to officials about exactly that possibility. What would be the most important point there to resolve is how to get Gaddafi out, or as I would think, how to get Gaddafi in. That is, how to allow him. And the objection that he is never going to leave Libya, it's preposterous. All these heroic figures that are going to they're ready to die for their country are good for romance and novels or something like that. I think that Gaddafi and the people around him, if offered a serious way out, they would take it. It has to be a face-saving attempt. It has to be done with care. It has to be done with enough pressure. In my opinion, and this is another point of contention, it can be done only by an American. It cannot be done by an Arab or by a European. It has to be done with all the weight of the American credibility versus Gaddafi. And negotiating a way for him to be isolated and in exile in his country would provide him a face value alternative, and so on, and then you start proceeding. Remember one thing, and we go back to the idea that Libya was an idea. Libya was fought for after the Second World War between the Republicans in Tripolitania and the monarchists in Cyrenaica, but who made Libya is Adrian Pelt and the United Nations and the Commission of the Libyan Notables that worked towards it. So Libyans themselves, those who know the history, the few who knows the history, already know that the country has been created by the United Nations with the support of the whole Libyan elite, yes, but by the United Nations. Therefore, even the idea that the UN intervenes or some foreign entity to create and help out the situation is not going to be illegitimate, seen as illegitimate or irregular by the Libyans, but to the contrary, it will probably be acceptable, it will probably be actually favored as a way out from a very bad situation. Therefore, the whole historical recollection of what Adrian Pelt did, which I'm trying to spread around and try to have people study how he did it, how it happened, because it is a possibility, can happen. It will be a very good way out and will be very acceptable to the Libyans. Yeah, I'm finishing. The other point where this is important to discuss is again the American interest. Why would America do that? Well, Libya is not a vital interest of the United States. The United States can perfectly survive or have an economic crisis without Libya. It doesn't, but the credibility of NATO, the credibility of the international order, by having a failed state de facto in the middle of the Mediterranean, with all the risks that it can bring to Tunisia, to Algeria, and to the equilibrium of Egypt, with the infiltration of terrorism, which will become very easy because anybody that knows Libya knows that anything can pass by if it's not very heavily controlled. It will be a problem in a very few months from now. So a president that is not getting interest today will be hit in his face 6 months from now if the situation continues to deteriorate with a very heavy situation. Not only in economy, not only political, not only humanitarian, which will be big, even though not huge, but the war of terror and anti-terrorism will be definitely hit in such a way. Therefore, intervening now with less expenses means save money and save power than later. Another point that I preach is that the whole idea of recognizing the Transitional National Council of Benghazi is valid only as and in the moment it comes to represent, if it comes to represent the Libyan government. Therefore, only after the taking of Tripoli, the freeing of Tripoli, and the possibility of having a national government unity. I don't believe that this recognition should be given, or this possibility should be given before, for various reasons. The genesis, its formation, its control, who they are, where the level of control of the territory that they have, who's behind, and so on and so on and so on. That is the other recommendation that, policy recommendation that I'm trying to make. All of this, of course, is subject to the fact that all of a sudden, which everybody again denies the possibility, there is a heavy intervention from the Western powers, which I don't see, nobody sees, but it's a possibility on the ground. If the French, the British, the Italians decide that Libya has to go and Libya has to be conquered, and they put the resources and invade the country, that is another option that is on the ground. We have to take into consideration it's a possibility that there is a boots on the ground and there are troops sent in to control Tripoli. It's not that difficult in a sense. I mean, militarily speaking, it's not like Iraq. It doesn't take 100,000 people to take Tripoli. It takes more, in my opinion, it's more difficult the decision to do it than the military implementation of doing it. But that's, again, it's up in the air. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We'll now open the floor to questions. Yes, Sam, please. Just, Sam, wait for the mic, please.
Karim, you spoke earlier in somewhat more detail than you did this time about the nature of the TNC. If they are to be part of a government or part of a negotiation, it would be useful to know as much as you can tell us about who they are, what their motives are, and how you think they would collaborate with any of the people who are still supporting the Gaddafi regime.
You take more questions?
You know, one at a time.
Okay. From what we know, it's a very composite group of people. Judges in the various councils, lawyers, mostly people who have served into the Gaddafi regimes. My doubts with them are that there are too many voices speaking, very lack of agreement between them, not a clear hierarchy. Like you read there are at least 3 or 4 spokespersons speaking about that. Not a clear program, except what the Europeans are telling them to do. And everybody was very impressed with Mahmoud Jibril's speech here at the Brookings Institution. I think that it's exactly, I'm telling you what you would like to hear from me. And I had the impression that he was talking about Switzerland, wasn't talking about Libya. He was making certain comments like the whole preposterous argument that Gaddafi in reality massacred the insurgents in Cyrenaica so that the Europeans would intervene, so that the rest of the rest of the Libyans will stand by him against the Europeans. It's a novel. And so on and so on. So some of them are good. Some of them are good people. Some of them are real patriots. Some of the, especially those who fought in Misurata, those who are fighting. I don't want to talk bad about it. What I'm saying is that given the fact that they are what they are, that so far they are limited in their spread, they're limited in the control of the territory, they're limited in the control of where the weapons go, and we have seen articles from reporters happening today. I wouldn't give them all the power and all the credit. I would still, my advice would be to the foreign governments, okay, have a commission that with them uses their money to strengthen them, to organize them, to prepare them, to do whatever there is, but don't give them right now the responsibility of government. First of all, it will mean the partition of Libya, and second, you don't know where the money is going to go, and that is Libyan money. And by Libya, for me, it's from Tobruk to the border of Tunis. It's not that part of it. Who they are, what they are, it's changing constantly. One was a general, then he gets out, then he's coming back. There is an incredible confusion. Anybody that knows them will see this confusion. Therefore, in that sense, I am suspicious. I wouldn't go all the way to recognize them. Also because it's very easy to say, we are 8 or 9 or 10, but there are another 20 who represent Tripolitania who are hiding, and there are already as I was hearing yesterday by someone said, there are committees being formed in Tripoli. Tripoli is ready to revolt and join the TNC. No, I can say the opposite, you can say the opposite, anybody can say. I mean, these are all words taken out. Where are the proofs, where are the arguments? Does it show, is there any action that we have seen that shows that there is an effect? There isn't. So far, there isn't. In that sense, the TNC should be helped, it should be strengthened, it should be supported, but with caution.
Yes, please. Just wait for the mic.
Hello, my name is Milan Mišić. I'm a journalist from Serbia. You haven't mentioned the fact that Gaddafi has been indicted by the International Criminal Court. How that complicates the overall situation and the attempts you mentioned to find an exit from this situation?
In theory, it kills any possible negotiation. In theory, that was the whole purpose of the French. At the beginning, was like to no diplomacy, no diplomatic action can be taken. So therefore, either Gaddafi goes, gets killed, or gets arrested. He's out of the way. They underestimated Gaddafi and overestimated the capacity of the revolt to win. The Africans are already saying that they will not respect that. Whether that is true or not will the rest remain to be seen. I still believe that if a negotiation is being undertaken by the French or by the Americans or by whoever with the real intention to find a solution to Libya, it means they have already solved the problem of the ICC, the International Criminal Court. It means that they have already dealing with the idea of putting him in Libya, which does not recognize the authority of the court, and they're already moving toward the direction. That's why I was also, my first proposal was face value. Gaddafi doesn't go in exile. He goes to think in the oasis of Seba or somewhere else and sits there surrounded by Italian bersaglieri or Germans or Serbian troops rotation who frees him. He's saving there, and in that case there is no court in criminal court, nobody goes and search him, and it's a way out. But I think that if it becomes true that they are negotiating, they have solved the issue. They found the country is ready to take it. I don't think, though, that's my personal guts, that Gaddafi will leave Libya. Gaddafi is looking for a solution to remain in Libya, say face value. His kids will. His family will. He'll accept to go abroad under protection, stay out. But he's going to stay in Libya. Not to die there, but he's not going to leave Libya. He doesn't trust the idea that he can be safe anywhere else.
Just a brief follow-up. Considering the fate of Milosevic, would Gaddafi trust the West?
No, but from what I know, he would trust the Americans. He doesn't trust the Europeans. He definitely doesn't trust the Arabs, and nobody can give him wrong for that. But he definitely trusts the Americans. Trust. From what I know, the Americans have a very high level of credibility with him. He fears them more than trust. So if the Americans come and guarantee him, and there is a war there, he would trust the Americans more than he would trust the Europeans. Definitely has no sympathy at all.
Let me ask you a question. You have spoken to us now twice to a small group, and this is a larger group. What is the situation on the ground? I mean, you know, there comes a time when the population can't take it anymore. And the idea that 50,000 people or 100,000 or 150,000 came, we all know in our part of the world that you can summon 500,000 people to show up, and even if they don't want, they have to show up. So give us an idea of what the situation on the ground in these cities are. There is a shortage of food, there is are the schools open? Is life normal? Is life not normal? I mean,
I have reports from Benghazi of situation is relatively under control and services are provided, and there is so the situation in the eastern provinces is probably easier to be assessed, and journalists are there and people are there. Where the situation is surreal is in Tripoli, where I've been told that traffic police are there with their white uniforms directing traffic. Gardeners are planting flowers, and buildings are being repainted and restructured. It is the regime tries to give the impression that it continues, but to a certain extent, people I have there tell me, no, life is continuing. There is food, there is services, there is light, there is electricity, banking are working, and more or less at night everything dies. But during the day we lead our life as it was together. These coffee shops are full of pastries, and there is the normal life is going on. The tension is at night, and the tension is in the unknown when there is a bombing, so the fear of the bomb comes on your house. So a lot of people left. The repression obviously is 10 times higher, so people are much more careful of what they say, what they do, what they talk. One of my cousins, for example, was a phone call with my father was intercepted, and he made a stupid demand of how is such and such person lives in Benghazi. So they intercepted him, and they get this guy, Usama, and they beat him up for 2 days before they left him. Of course, he immediately get home and took a gun and left. And he said he can't stay in Tripoli because anything you do, you're checked 5 times, you're controlled. Because obviously they're doing preemptive actions. Whenever there is a fear, the 2 kids are doing something, they immediately go and try to take them and get them out of the way. But at the same time, I know that there are parts of the world that you can summon as many people as you want. But from what I've heard from my friends who are in Tripoli and the Italian journalists who are observers who are there, who I know personally, the impression is not such. The impression is that maybe some are forced, but a lot of people are really feverishly, are really angry almost in favor of Gaddafi. Some of the interviews that they got, without naming, Vincenzo telling me, Negro of Republic telling me, people saying, why is NATO protecting civilians, and they're bombing me, and why they don't recognize that I'm that I am a Libyan too, and I have the right to express myself, and I want Gaddafi, I do not want the people from Benghazi. Why my position doesn't count? 10%, 15%, whatever that is, it's still enough for Gaddafi to absorb means of support, to have trusted people to move around and resist.
Any more questions, comments? Michael, just wait for the please.
Hi, Michael Lather from the Wilson Center. Karim, you spoke about in the beginning that there were organized seizing of weapons and then a concern that from the arms given to the rebels had gone to Islamists. And certainly a key French concern going in has been a Somalia-type situation in Libya, a greater area of unrest and chaos. Could you explain exactly what you think happened in the beginning? What is your theory about how it came down? And how valid a concern is that this could turn into a large area of chaos and anarchy with all the consequences that we know very well?
Thank you. What is emerging is, I mean, I don't want to get into the whole theory that I expressed every time about the possibility of having a French golpe that was prepared, because it's not coming up, and I will be talking about ideas and things that are happening together which are strange. What happened that if something was prepared before, that is how the attack to the Derna barracks was done sort of by militias, Islamists. The regime, from what I've heard, the regime, people I know the regime told me, it's the Islamists who are taking over. So because the attack in Derna, the captain of the barrack told me, I know some of them, they are Islamists taking over. But then they took these weapons and distributed it to the people in there, and then all of a sudden officers started defecting and running away, and soldiers were giving the weapons to these groups. All of a sudden, immediately there is the defection of Abdel Yunis, the former Minister of Defense. With his troops, he takes immediate control of the city of Benghazi and supports or defends the TNC. All of us, because the control of the city of Benghazi was done by these troops here with some local volunteers. And the TNC is put into power. How spontaneous that is? That was my first question. How spontaneous that could have been? Usually revolts, it's true that any revolt is different from itself. But why not Mohammed and his 100 kids with weapons taking over and becoming the leader of Benghazi? Why all of a sudden you have the former Minister of Defense, the former Minister of Justice, the former Chief of the Tribunal, the former guy, who all of a sudden form this committee and they say, and all of a sudden councils are happening all around the Cyrenaica who all bow their acceptance to the TNC. Fine, these things may happen, but as I was saying the other time, some suspicion, some doubts, naturally or not, you have to have them. If we do an analysis. If we do wishful thinking, if we like the whole idea of people that revolts and naturally all of a sudden in a Swiss-like mentality form the councils in the cities and each one of them appoints one guy that then goes to Benghazi and nicely appoints another guy, and then you have a Transitional Council that is fully representative of the Cyrenaica as some are trying to sell it, you are free to believe it. That's not the way I tend to do analysis. And there are many things. For example, another thing that European press has not taken. The Libyan TV showed on the beginning of the second week of the revolt, I think. And this is on record. But nobody took the pain to go and check it out. An interception. I don't know if the English word is to intercept. When you catch two phone calls happening. The Libyan secret services intercepted this phone call between the former ambassador of British ambassador in Libya in London with the son of a former prime minister of the king in London and Abdel Jalil, who's the leader of the TNC, regarding the fact that 7 or 8 British members of the special forces and 2 civilians had been captured by militias of the TNC. You remember that? It has all been aired by the Libyan TV, where these people in London were telling them, what the hell are you doing there? Those are the people we are sending you. I said, you didn't tell me before, because I didn't control the guy who arrested them. Again, there are plenty of reports from the Libyans who talk about the French being there, and so on. But all of this, if it doesn't come up, if it's not corroborated, if it's not really proved that they are authentic, it cannot be published or taken out. These are just, we are as scholars, we are allowed to do that. You take various dots, say this is suspicious, this doesn't work, this doesn't fit. You cross the lines and you say, maybe something strange has happened, but can't prove it, so therefore you can't bring it into a brief or into a legal argument. But it is important, as I was telling before, for the scenario that is happening now, because, and that's where I'm trying to communicate to the Americans is, do not proceed to recognize the TNC officially and allow it to have full access to the safe until you are certain 100% that they do represent Libya and that the selection of the elite of the members of the future government is done under international supervision. Is it too much to ask? Maybe. But it's, as a Libyan, I have that feeling. I rather have some control of who's getting than these people whose genesis is at least suspicious. At least.
Okay. But who should have the control of the safe then?
The new Libyan government that has to be, once Gaddafi is gone and once Libya is united, then you're going to have a mechanism of selection, so a transitional government. That transitional government, under the international supervision, support of NATO, UN, whatever it is, at that point, whatever happens. That is the government of Libya. Tripoli is the capital. Benghazi is a big part of it. Then they will have access to what is left of Libya. All the money abroad, the control, the pension funds, everything that will be in their hands. Whether at that moment they are honest or dishonest, they're good or bad, that is true of every government. So you cannot control the honest people in power. But at least that the selection of this representative is a little bit more objective than the one we have so far of this group of people who call themselves the Transitional Council.
Any more questions? Yes, please. This last question. Yes.
Hi, Ryan Gillis from Newsmax Media. I'm just curious what you believe would be a workable American approach to negotiations if the United States did decide to engage, because you say Gaddafi says he will not leave, although you said he respects Americans and potentially, I mean, do you believe that he would be able to, what do you believe would be a successful negotiation tactic from an American perspective?
Total hypothesis, dreamland, total, the best possible options we can, Switzerland, like somebody goes on behalf of the American president. It doesn't have to be an American official, because you have to be, because I understand the fear of the administration not to expose the president to a bad figure. So it has to be somebody, maybe preceded by a phone call by an African president who tells us somebody's coming to talk to you, listen. He will go there and will tell them this is the last possible negotiation. This is the offer with the word of the American president that you go to Sebha, hidden in the barracks, that you are surrounded by whatever police force. You are going, we will tell that you're going there, you withdraw, you abdicate in favor of somebody else in the regime, which is not as tainted. It can be an older figure, somebody who could still control the structure of the regime. You go in exile. Your kids are out of the country under our protection. They won't be touched. They will be left free to go around, but they don't have to be near the borders. The UN will come intervene with a commission that then will supervise the negotiations between the new figure of the regime and the TNC Council to create a new government of Libya. And then you go back to the old 1950, 1951 procedure, which is you go and select, because there is no way that you have elections in Libya today. And you can select people from the TNC, you can select people from the tribes of the interior, you can select people from you can have a whole process of selection where you form a commission that then creates a constitution and so on. And then you have a constitution and it will be approved, and in the meantime there is a transitional government that has to be formed with technocrats, possibly people competent, and Libya is full of people competent, especially those who have been prepared abroad. There are thousands of good people that can administer, can run the country, and you go on. Now, is this the perfect situation? I don't know, but at least it's a good way to stop the civil war and to prevent the collapse of the structure of the state. And if you think about it, it's only the idea to begin with, which is very difficult, to convince somebody in this administration to go on with that avenue, with that road. Because once it is, the risks are minimal. That's what I try to communicate. I mean, how can you think that it's easier to bomb than to run the risk? And when I understood that their fear was to involve the president, I said, well, then send an academic, send a friend of a guy, send anybody. That if Gaddafi says, go to hell, the American administration can always say, well, who the hell is this guy? In politics, it happens every day. And apply the same rules. Send somebody with the credibility. But it has to be the credibility of the United States behind it. The UN do not have credibility. Khatibi, the envoy UN, has been to in Libya, 7, 8 times. How many times have you seen Gaddafi? Yeah, but he was next door. But you didn't see him. Do you think Gaddafi fears the UN or fears Italy or fears France or England? So it's only the weight of the Americans that can tilt the situation. Possibly. If it doesn't work, continue to bomb. What can I say?
At this very happy note, please join me in thanking Karim as well.